The weight of grace. The steel door slammed shut behind Officer Maya Chen for the 847th time in her career, but this morning something felt different. She didn't know yet that the woman being processed in cell block D would become the reason she questioned everything she'd ever believed about duty, loyalty, and the thin line between right and wrong. All she knew was that her hands were shaking as she gripped her coffee cup, and the fluorescent lights of Riverside Correctional Facility seemed harsher than usual, casting shadows that looked like prison bars across every surface. Maya had built her entire identity around being unshakable. At 29, she was the youngest senior guard at Riverside, respected by inmates and colleagues, alike for her fairness and her ability to see the human being behind the orange jumpsuit. But fairness required distance. Her father, a retired corrections officer himself, had drilled that into her from the day she graduated from the academy. Never get close. Never let them see you as anything but authority. The moment you blur that line, he'd said, you've already lost. She thought she understood that lesson. She thought she'd mastered it. Then came Inmate 4782, real name Sarah Mitchell, and everything Maya thought she knew about herself began to crumble like old concrete under relentless pressure. Sarah arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, transferred from a facility upstate after what the paperwork vaguely described as classification review. Maya was assigned to her intake processing, a routine task she'd performed hundreds of times. But when Sarah stepped into the processing room, her wrists cuffed in front of her, Maya felt the air shift. Sarah had dark auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, green eyes that carried oceans of sadness, and a quiet dignity that seemed impossible for someone wearing chains. She didn't look down or away like most new inmates. She looked directly at Maya with an expression that wasn't defiant or afraid, just profoundly tired, as if she'd already survived more than most people could imagine. The official report said Sarah was serving 8 years for embezzlement and fraud. She'd been CFO of a pharmaceutical company, living a life of comfort and success, until everything collapsed. But those dry facts didn't explain the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders curved inward as if protecting something fragile inside, or the barely visible scar that ran along her jawline. Maya processed her paperwork, explained the facility rules, and assigned her to cell block D without incident. It should have been forgettable. It should have been just another Tuesday. But Maya found herself thinking about Sarah that night, and the next night, and the night after that. Their second encounter came 3 weeks later during Maya's routine rounds. She found Sarah in the prison library, an outdated collection of donated books housed in a converted storage room. Most inmates avoided it, preferring the noise and distraction of the common areas. But Sarah sat alone at a corner table, completely absorbed in a worn copy of poetry by Mary Oliver. The late afternoon light filtered through the barred windows, catching the copper highlights in her hair, and for a moment Maya forgot where she was. She forgot the cameras in every corner, forgot the policy manual she'd memorized, forgot every warning her father had ever given her. Sarah looked up, noticed Maya watching, and smiled. It wasn't much, just a small lift at the corners of her mouth, but it carried such genuine warmth that Maya felt something crack open in her chest. She nodded professionally and continued her rounds, but her heart was pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it echoing off the concrete walls. The conversation started small and innocent. Maya would check in during library hours, asking routine questions about adjustment to facility life, any problems with other inmates, basic welfare checks that were technically part of her job. Sarah always answered politely, never asking for special treatment or trying to manipulate the situation. But slowly, carefully, they began to talk about real things. Sarah mentioned her love of poetry, how words had been her lifeline during the darkest days of her trial. Maya admitted she'd wanted to be a teacher before family pressure pushed her toward corrections. They discussed books, then music, then the small observations about life that only people paying close attention ever notice. Maya knew she was crossing a line. Every conversation lasted a little longer than the previous one. Every interaction left her wanting more. She started volunteering for shifts in cell block D, timing her rounds to coincide with Sarah's library hours, finding excuses to be near her. Other guards noticed. Whispers started circulating through the facility. Nothing concrete, but the kind of speculation that could destroy a career if anyone decided to make it official. The breaking point came on a frigid, January night during Maya's solo overnight shift. A pipe burst in cell block D, flooding 3 cells, including Sarah's. Maya supervised the emergency relocation, watching Sarah gather her few possessions in a plastic bag, shivering in her thin prison-issue clothing. The heating system was malfunctioning too, and the temporary holding area was barely warmer than the flooded cells. Without thinking, Maya grabbed a blanket from the staff break room and brought it to Sarah, draping it around her shoulders. Their fingers touched for just a second, but that brief contact sent electricity through Maya's entire body. Sarah looked up at her, and in that moment, everything unspoken between them suddenly became unbearably clear. The loneliness, the longing, the impossible, terrifying truth that Maya had fallen in love with an inmate. And from the way Sarah's eyes filled with tears, she wasn't alone in this feeling. Maya stepped back quickly, mumbling something about checking the other cells, and fled. She spent the rest of that shift in turmoil, her mind racing between panic and an emotion so overwhelming she couldn't name it. This was everything she'd been warned against. This was career suicide. This was violation of every ethical code she'd sworn to uphold. But it was also real in a way. Nothing else in her carefully controlled life had ever been. For 2 weeks, Maya avoided the library. She traded shifts to stay away from cell block D. She tried to convince herself it was a temporary madness, a confusion of pity and loneliness that would fade if she just maintained proper distance. But lying in bed each night, she felt Sarah's absence like a physical ache. The world had become colorless without those brief moments of connection. Sarah sent her a note through the interfacility mail system, using the official request form inmates were allowed to submit to staff. It simply said, "I miss talking about poetry. I understand if we can't anymore, but I wanted you to know that your kindness has meant everything. You reminded me I'm still human. Thank you for that gift." Maya read those words 20 times, tears streaming down her face in the privacy of her car after her shift ended. She realized she'd been living half a life, going through motions, never allowing herself to feel anything deeply because feeling meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant risk. Sarah, despite being locked up, despite losing everything, still had the courage to be vulnerable, to feel, to hope. The next day, Maya returned to the library during Sarah's usual time. They didn't touch. They barely even looked directly at each other. But Maya sat down across from her and said quietly, "Tell me about the Mary Oliver poem you were reading the first time. I really saw you." Sarah's eyes filled with understanding and something that looked like relief. "It's called Wild Geese," she said softly. "It's about not having to be good, about letting the soft animal of your body love what it loves, about belonging to the family of things even when you feel most alone." They talked for 30 minutes, professional on the surface, but beneath it, in the spaces between words, a different conversation was happening. A conversation about loneliness and connection, about seeing and being seen, about 2 women finding each other in the last place either expected. The relationship that developed over the following months existed in those impossible spaces. They never touched again. They never spoke about their feelings directly. But in a system designed to strip away humanity, they created something profoundly human. Maya began bringing books she thought Sarah would enjoy, slipping them into the library donations. Sarah started writing poetry herself, leaving folded papers and returned books that Maya would discover during her rounds. The poems never mentioned Maya by name, but they spoke of unexpected grace, of light in darkness, of hope that arrives wearing a uniform and carrying keys. Other guards definitely noticed now. Maya's supervisor called her in for a meeting, asking pointed questions about her relationship with inmate 4782. Maya kept her answers professional, insisting she was simply ensuring a model prisoner's rehabilitation, but she saw the doubt in her supervisor's eyes. The warning was clear. One more question mark and there would be an investigation. Maya knew she should end it. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this path led nowhere but destruction. But the part of her that had come alive over these months, the part that felt real emotion for the first time in her adult life, couldn't let go. The crisis came in March when Sarah received devastating news. Her mother, the only family member who'd stood by her through the trial and conviction, had died suddenly of a stroke. Maya was on duty when Sarah was told. She watched this strong, dignified woman collapse under the weight of grief, watched her try to hold back sobs in the counselor's office. watched her walk back to her cell with her head down and shoulders shaking. That evening, Maya did something that could end her career. She waited until the night shift, until the hallways were quiet and most inmates were sleeping. She went to Sarah's cell, where she could hear muffled crying from inside. She stood outside the bars and said quietly, "I'm here." Sarah came to the cell door, her face swollen from crying, and they stood there, separated by steel but closer than Maya had ever been to another person. They talked for hours in hushed voices. Maya shared things she'd never told anyone, about losing her own mother when she was 12, about the loneliness of building walls to protect yourself from pain. Sarah talked about regret and guilt, about the mistakes that brought her here, about her fear that she'd never be more than a number and a crime. As dawn approached, Maya knew she had to leave before the shift change. But before she went, she pressed her hand against the cold bar, and Sarah placed her hand opposite Maya's, their palms separated by an inch of steel but connected by something far stronger than metal. "I see you," Maya whispered. "Not the inmate. Not the crime. You, Sarah, the woman who loves poetry and finds beauty in pain and somehow still has hope. I see you, and you're magnificent." Sarah smiled through her tears. "You saved my life," she said. "Not by breaking me out or bending rules, by reminding me I still have one worth saving. Whatever happens, Maya, that's everything." The next morning, Maya turned herself in to the prison administration. She reported every conversation, every book exchange, every moment that had crossed the line between professional and personal. She didn't mention the night at Sarah's cell. There were some things too sacred to be reduced to incident reports, but she gave them enough to justify her voluntary resignation. The hearing was brief. Maya's supervisor, perhaps understanding more than she'd let on, accepted the resignation without recommending charges or investigation. Maya's career in corrections ended quietly, with paperwork and a final escort from the building. She didn't try to see Sarah one last time. The cameras were everywhere, and Maya had already risked Sarah's safety too many times. But she left a book in the library donations, a collection of Mary Oliver's complete poems, and inside the front cover she'd written a single line, "You taught me that grace comes in unexpected forms, and love is always worth the cost." If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of unexpected connection and the courage it takes to love against all odds, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that love finds us in the most unlikely places. Your engagement helps these stories reach hearts that need them most. Maya rebuilt her life slowly. She went back to school, finally pursuing that teaching degree she'd abandoned years ago. She moved to a different city, started fresh, carried Sarah with her in every sunrise, every poem, every moment of unexpected beauty. The world told her their connection was wrong, forbidden, impossible. But Maya had learned something in those months inside Riverside's walls. Love doesn't ask permission. It doesn't follow rules or respect boundaries. It simply is, fierce and true and transforming. Sarah had 4 more years on her sentence. Maya marked each one, counting down in her private journal, never forgetting the woman who'd taught her that the strongest walls we build are the ones around our own hearts. She wrote letters that she never sent, filled notebooks with everything she wanted to say if she ever got the chance. On a warm September morning, exactly 4 years after Maya's resignation, she stood outside Riverside Correctional Facility watching the release gate. Her hands were shaking just like they had that first day. But this time it wasn't fear. It was hope. The gate opened. Sarah walked out wearing civilian clothes, carrying a small bag of belongings, blinking in the bright sunlight of freedom. She looked around, uncertain, until her eyes found Maya standing by the old oak tree across the street. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, all those years and words and impossible circumstances between them. Then Sarah smiled, that same small, warm smile from the library all those years ago, and started walking toward her. Maya had no idea what happened next. She didn't know if they could build something real outside those walls, if the connection that sustained them through darkness could survive in daylight. But as Sarah got closer, as the distance between them finally closed, Maya realized it didn't matter. They had already survived the impossible. If you're still with us and this story moved you, please take a moment to comment below and tell us what moment touched you most. Your comments mean the world and help this story find others who need to hear it. They met in the middle, Two women who'd loved each other across steel bars and broken rules and every obstacle the world could throw between them. Sarah reached out and took Maya's hand, skin on skin with no barriers, and they stood there in the September sunshine, holding on, refusing to let go. Love, Maya had learned, doesn't conquer all. But sometimes, if you're brave enough and stubborn enough and willing to sacrifice everything, love conquers enough, and enough, it turned out, was more than sufficient. It was everything. It was grace. It was freedom. It was home. They walked away from Riverside together, toward whatever came next, carrying nothing but each other and the certainty that some connections transcend every boundary, even the ones made of steel and stone and social condemnation. Their story wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be easy going forward, but it was theirs, honest and hard-won and absolutely real. And in a world that tried to reduce them both to roles and rules and rigid definitions, that was the greatest rebellion of all. To love, to hope, to believe that grace comes in the most unexpected forms. Wearing a uniform or an orange jumpsuit, carrying keys or poetry, but always worth the journey.